Hello everyone who's joining today. I'm Paige, I'm the Social Media Officer at Epilepsy Society, and thank you for joining us for this Q&A Facebook Live with our Medical Director, Professor Leigh Sander. And this Q&A is going to be about the COVID-19 vaccine and epilepsy. And just to let everyone know as well that this recording will be available on Facebook after the live stream ends. So yeah, just a reminder before we begin that this Q&A is in relation to the coronavirus vaccine rollout in the UK. And that Professor Sander is only going to be able to answer general questions regarding epilepsy and the vaccine. Any kind of specific questions regarding medications for epilepsy or individual medical advice he won't be able to offer today. And also a reminder that our Epilepsy Society's latest information on COVID-19 and epilepsy can be found on our website, and we can post a link to this in the comments. And the charity will update this information as and when we receive things. So yes, we're just going to start off today by asking Leigh the most commonly asked questions that we've seen on our social media over the last few weeks, as I know we've been receiving quite a few from a lot of you. And then we'll move on to any questions we've been sent in advance of today, and hopefully as well pick up any live questions as we go. We may not get through everybody as we have lots of questions, but we'll try our best. So our first question, Leigh, to start with was, I thought people with epilepsy weren't in the clinically extremely vulnerable group being asked to shield. Why are we now being offered the vaccine as a priority, and does this mean we should also be shielding?
Thank you. This is a very interesting question. I think that if people with epilepsy should be shielding because they've now been offered the vaccine, I think that these are two different issues. I think it's fair to say that some people with epilepsy, actually a number of people with epilepsy, were asked to shield when they had some comorbidity that would go along with their epilepsy, if they had some other conditions. So this would, people in this condition with other conditions were asked to shield. Now, I think that with regards to the vaccine, at the end of the day, everyone should have the vaccine. So, when people with epilepsy are in the priority list it doesn't mean to say they should be shielding. They should, it's just saying that, we should all have the vaccine, and that would be, I think that that's an important thing to protect people. So I wouldn't have a problem with people being offered the vaccine as a priority, even if they haven't another comorbidity or they're not over the prescribed age for the vaccines.
Thank you, Leigh. So question 2 on our kind of commonly asked questions was, why aren't people with epilepsy higher on the list of priorities? And also, when will a person with epilepsy be offered their vaccine?
Well, I think that that's, as the previous question, this is about where people with epilepsy are on the priority list for the vaccines. You could argue that people, if we had used the benchmark of shielding that came up in the previous question, then only people that were asked to shield should have the vaccine at this point. But no, people with epilepsy are on the priority list. They are actually quite high up. They will get it before everyone else in the population, and I think that that's important, and I would encourage everyone to have the vaccine once they offered it.
Thank you, Leigh. So moving on to our third question, which is, has the vaccine been tested on people with epilepsy, and also what data is there about the effects of the vaccine on people with epilepsy? For example, high temperatures as a side effect, triggering seizures, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a very important question that comes up very often from people with epilepsy I see in clinic. I think that this vaccine development, not just one, but several at the same time, was done at a very quick speed. And this was for a number of reasons. One is because we nowadays are much better at identifying the genome of a virus. So normally that would take years and years, and maybe if we remember 10 years ago, we didn't know this. So right at the onset of the problem, we had a genome for the virus. That actually gave us a lot of time, brought the time for the development of vaccines much further up. And one thing that was very innovative about the development of this vaccine was that several stages of development that in old times would have done one after the other. So you do phase 1, you finish that, you look at what you have, and then you move to phase 2. And once you have that, you move to phase 3. With this vaccine, actually, there were development in parallel, so different phases happening, and that allow us to get time, to make time, and this is why so quickly these vaccines were developed. Now, people with epilepsy were entered in the clinical trials, and I know several people that actually were in the clinical trials. But of course, people with epilepsy is about 1% of the population. So if we have a clinical trial that had 100 people, and these trials had thousands and thousands, we would expect that about 1% would have had epilepsy. And to my knowledge, there is not really reports of anything affecting particularly people with epilepsy. And as I said earlier, we would encourage people with epilepsy to have the vaccine, because that will help not only them, but also people around them.
Thank you, Lay. And I guess a question that leads on quite well from that, which we've had, is the coronavirus vaccine safe to have if I have epilepsy? And also, is there a particular vaccine that I should be having out of the vaccines that are available?
That's also very good question. I think that, of course, there might be people with epilepsy, but that's going to be very rare, and that's going to be the exception. That may have some immune or may have some history of very severe allergies that you might have to think about. But for the great majority of people, great majority, even if they have comorbidities, the vaccine seems to be safe at this stage. And I think that it's very important to remember that if a vaccine are going to have an effect, it's usually a sort of very quick, it's an allergic reaction. That's why people often, if they have an history after a vaccine, they're asked to wait 10 minutes, 15 minutes in the place where they have the test. So I am pretty convinced that it's a safe procedure. Now, I don't think that looking at, because there are other vaccines there are other vaccines for similar viruses that have been used for longer, and they don't seem to have any long-term side effects. Here we have vaccines sometimes using slightly different technologies, but at the end of the day, we should have a sort of clue. We should have an idea of effects that other vaccines could have left in the long term, and they seem to be pretty safe. So I would not expect anything. I would be surprised if anything happens. The next question, next part of the question page is, what would be the vaccine to go for?
Yes.
I'm very generic here. I think that we should go for the vaccine that we are offered. There are no reasons to believe that for people with epilepsy, this vaccine is going to be better than the other. The important thing is that people have the booster at the right time, and then they are protected. So if someone is offered the Pfizer or the AstraZeneca or the Moderna or the new that will be coming from Johnson & Johnson, I think that is the issue of just getting it. Because they all seem to have similar offered the similar amounts of protection.
Thank you, Lay. So our next question is, will the vaccine interact dangerously with my anti-epileptic medication? For example, lower the threshold which the medication is working?
Now, I can be very reassuring. The question here is that if the vaccine is going to interact or interfere with the anti-epilepsy, anti-seizure medication, there's no reason to believe that they will, because the fraction of the vaccine that is injected is tiny. It does not interact with the drugs, because they're going to be, they're going to be metabolized, and they're going to be dealt with the body in a very different way. So I can be very reassuring. People should not be concerned about potential interactions or interference of the vaccine with people's antiepileptic drugs. It's actually it's something that is very straight. So no concerns here.
Thank you, Lei. So our next question is from somebody who says their seizures are controlled, and it's, will the vaccine only be offered to people with uncontrolled seizures or severe epilepsy, or is it being offered to everybody with epilepsy?
I think it's going to be offered to everyone with epilepsy at the right time. The aim is that everyone will be eventually vaccinated. Of course, there are going to be people that decide, they make for their own reasons not to want it. But anyone that is willing to have it should have it. And I think there's going to be anyone asking if your seizures are well controlled at the time of the vaccine. So that's another, I wouldn't have this concern.
Thank you, Lei. And our next question is, will my child with epilepsy who's under the age of 16 be offered the vaccine?
Well, I think that there is some discussion at the moment about at what age the vaccine should be offered to people, students. And this might, will it go down to some countries? People have it over the age of 6, and some other places are going to do it for people over 12. Other places, at the first phase, only adults will have. But if we think, for instance, that schools are a good place to exchange virus transmitting from one person to the other, it would make sense eventually that our children should be vaccinated. And I think that there should not be any difference for people with epilepsy. They should go when their peers are going to have it.
Thank you, Lei. And this next one is kind of about the vaccine rollout. So how many priority groups are there for the vaccine? And also, is the priority group 6 just in England, or is that across other parts of the UK as well?
Yes, depending on how you count, there are 9 or 10 priority groups. I'm afraid that I would consult the sort of Scottish lists, or the Welsh list, or the Irish list, to see if they are. But I suspect if they're not exactly the same, they're very similar.
That's great. Great, thank you, Lei. So this next question is somebody saying, my epilepsy was caused by a vaccination. So is it safe for me to have the COVID-19 jab?
This is a challenging question. I think that we need to understand the issue of epilepsy associated with vaccines. There's been quite a lot of debate, and a lot of people would have had a diagnosis of vaccine encephalopathy, which was thought to be due to vaccine. There's also the concern of autism associated with the vaccine. But I think that both of these issues, they have now been clarified. There is no association with autism, and epilepsy and vaccine. There is something else that has come out. Most of the people that started their epilepsy around the time of vaccines, they had some other issue, and it was the fever they had after the vaccination that was the trigger for their first seizure. It was a coincidence to some extent. We know that for instance, that people are more vulnerable, some people, to have a seizure when they have fever. And we know some conditions that have this. So most of the kids that have what is called vaccine epilepsy, they have something else, which is the cause, but the fever that came as a result of the vaccine triggered their first seizure. And that's why people sometimes think that there is an association. I think that I would still encourage all the people that I see that have a similar history, where their first seizures or the start of their epilepsy was associated with fever, to have the vaccine. Because the benefit of the protection overweights the risk that are with it. The other thing which is important to remember is that hardly any reports of big fevers with the vaccine. People have sort of low intensity fever, which normally wouldn't trigger a seizure. So I think that we can be reassuring to people that have these concerns that, you know, it should hopefully won't be a problem, and all the evidence that we have points in that direction.
Thank you, Lei. So our next question is from somebody who's saying, I'm worried I'll have additional stigma against me if I choose not to take up the vaccine. So that's that person's concern.
Yes, I can see this. I think that epilepsy has a stigma, but to my knowledge, it has not yet been mixed up with, let's put it that way. I don't think that not having the vaccine is a stigma. I think it's a personal choice. So I don't think that, I can't, you know, I've been proven wrong many times, but I cannot see how this will, you know, cause synergy between the stigma. You know, a person with epilepsy, out of their personal choice, decides not to have the vaccine. I don't think that this will create or enhance unfound stigma around epilepsy. I think that these are independent issues.
Thank you, Lei. So coming on to our kind of last 5 most commonly asked questions we've seen. This is, should pregnant women with epilepsy have the vaccine? And if and can they insist if they want to have it, or could it be refused?
I think that the position at the moment is that because they has not been sort of clear, it's probably better not to have the vaccine during pregnancy. That doesn't mean that there is a difference between people with epilepsy and not. But you know, if these are just to be on the safe side and learn more, people are saying maybe it's not a good idea to vaccinate during pregnancy, but that doesn't take into account the epilepsy. So it's just a general care issue.
Thank you, Lei. So this person is asking, do I need to discuss other health conditions that I might have with my doctor in addition to epilepsy, in case any of them are contraindicated with the vaccine?
Yes, it's always important to bring up any other medical problems when people discuss the vaccine. But I think it's reassuring that there are very few absolute contraindications to the vaccine. Yes, you discussed this, but I don't think that that will be considered epilepsy and other comorbidities will not increase the level of people that will be turned down for it. I think it's important people bring this up, but it's not going to have an effect, and most people will end up having the vaccine, protect themselves and protect everybody else.
Thank you, Lei. So this next question is, will the vaccine affect my fertility?
Well, I think that it's the early days. We just started vaccinate en masse in the last months or so, a little bit longer than that now. And you could argue to have 100% evidence is only the long term. But again, we go back to the history of other vaccines. There's not really evidence out there to suggest that having vaccines that cause an immunologic and an immune response will have an impact on fertility. There's no theoretical reasons for that, and there is no really evidence from other vaccines to make me think that this should be a major concern.
Thank you, Lei. So this next question is, I think I'll combine these two actually, because I think they kind of work with each other. So can a person be moved from priority group 6 to group 4 if their epilepsy is uncontrolled? And also, does their GP have any say about which priority group they're in for the vaccine?
Depends on who you ask. This is an interesting question. I think that in some areas GPs take a very active role, but in other areas they follow the rules. It's very important that people remember that when you create a guideline or you create a list of priorities, not everyone, it cannot legislate for everyone, and there might be times that, you know, people for reasons of good sense are moved from one or the other. So I personally don't see a problem if someone is moved from priority 6 to priority 4 because they have seizures, and you know, I think that that would be I would not have any problem with that. Now, of course, in many places the vaccines are being provided via primary care, that is the GP setups, the practices, and they might be differences from one place to another. But the important thing is that everyone will get vaccinated. Anyone that wishes will get vaccinated, and be it on group 4 or group 6.
Thank you, Lei. So we're going to now move on to some of the questions we had pre-submitted for this live stream, and also some of the questions we're getting through today. So I'll start with a question here, which is, I am an epileptic here in London and my husband takes care of me. I know I should get the vaccination in group 6, but what about my husband, as he's my carer and he'll need to take me to the centre? Can he get it at the same time? And also, what proof can I give that he's my carer?
That's a good question, and I think that this is again will be very individual and different. It might be very much localization related. There are places that people, you know, carers will have it when they go with their person. There's always the issue that there might be some left over, and it's a question to ask nicely. I don't ask the person if, you know, wants the local, or maybe even better, to contact the practice or contact who has organized this before and saying, my carer is coming, and would it be appropriate, or would you have space or something for X or Y to have it? So I think that there is, I wouldn't think that it's a national rule saying, you know, that it cannot happen, but it's a question of how things are organized locally.
Thank you, Lei. So this is a question we've had come in today, and this is, can someone with uncontrolled complex partial seizures have the vaccine?
Of course, if there is no other contraindication from the severe immunological disease or very strong allergies, then there is no contraindication. People should have, regardless of the number of seizures they're having. I think it's important, as I said, and I think we need to reinforce this for the good of the person and for everyone around them. The more people are vaccinated, the merrier. So I would encourage people that come and talk to me in clinic or ask me this question. I will encourage them to have the vaccine.
Thank you, Lei. And our next question here is, can I ask, is there an increased risk of seizures following the vaccine if you already have drug-resistant epilepsy?
I think it's very difficult to predict. I have had no report of anyone that has made this, but doesn't mean to say I cannot hear it tomorrow. At the moment, it's all reassuring. I think it's fair to say that they've been in China and in Italy and in Spain, they were big groups of people, and we have here as well cohorts. We have not seen any increase in seizures that were directly related to COVID or even acute COVID. People sometimes, they will have anxieties, stresses, things that are not happening, and that will bring their own challenges. But the COVID itself And at this stage, I think it's fair to say that we don't have any reports of increase in seizures after the vaccine.
Thank you, Lei. So this is the next question we've had come through today on the live stream. So it's the Pfizer vaccine has problems for people with allergies. If you have a severe allergy to phenytoin, should you have the vaccine, and which one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's, yes, the allergy is one of the things I mentioned, but it's fair to say that a severe reaction to phenytoin doesn't have a predictive effect on the vaccine. They're very different things. So I don't think that that would be a contraindication. So the person that has had a reaction to phenytoin still can take the vaccine, unless, of course, there are other problems.
Thank you, Lei. And I guess this question we've also had today kind of follows on. It's if your epilepsy is controlled but you're allergic to antibiotics, should you have the vaccine done?
I cannot see any problem with that. I think that a person that had an allergy to an antibiotic can still have the vaccine, because the vaccine and antibiotics are different, very different products. You know, it depends on which antibiotics we're talking about, but there's nothing similar in the antibiotic world to one of the vaccines. Because they are very different. It's a very tiny amount, and it's usually is an excipient where you have some modified, you have a tiny piece of the virus that has been sort of attenuated, which will make the body create antibodies. So it's a very different thing, and I would still encourage the person that had an allergy with an antibiotic to have the vaccine.
Thank you, Lei. So this next question we have was sent in before today. So it's, as I understand it, those with epilepsy are in group 6. Due to my age, I'm in category 9. My concern is that I won't get an invite when they roll out the vaccination for group 6. And if this does happen, what should that person do?
Contact the practice, yeah, to say, hey, I have not received my invitation. Has it been lost in the post or in the email somewhere? When can I have it?
Thank you, Lei. So this next question we've had today is, I'm learning to drive now, and I'm worried that if I have a seizure as part of the vaccine, my epilepsy will be blamed and I'll no longer be able to drive.
I think that if a seizure happened, I would not automatically assume that it's the vaccine. Sometimes people can get stressed, there can be other reasons, seizures can happen at random. But unfortunately, the way that the rules are set up, the person would have to go for another year without seizure before they are allowed to restart the process or start driving. So I don't think that that is, the vaccine makes a difference to the rules. If yeah, it's that. So person is the seizure that will determine where the person is.
Thank you. So this next one, I think we might have covered this a bit earlier, but I guess we could kind of repeat just to kind of clarify for people. So it's how many people who took part in the clinical trials had epilepsy?
We don't really know, because there have been many different trials. To my knowledge, there have been no pooling, but I assume that it will be somewhere around the prevalence of epilepsy in the population. And this is around, let's say, somewhere between 0.5 to 1%. And you would expect similar numbers because the clinical trials were not actually selecting people for different reasons. That's the population that was coming. So I would expect that about 1% would have had epilepsy during the clinical trial program.
Thank you, Lei. So our next question here is, would someone who has epilepsy and also a heart condition still be in priority group 6?
It depends on where they are with there are different heart conditions. Without knowing exactly what it is, it's difficult to say. But some people that have malformations and other problems, they might be slightly ahead. you know, it's something that needs to be taken up individually with the local care team, the GPs, to find where the person is.
Thank you, Lei. And again, this is another question that's kind of focusing around allergies. So this person's saying, if you're prone to allergies and also have epilepsy, is it safe to have the vaccine?
Well, I think that there are allergies and there are allergies. If someone has a history of severe allergies, and this is something that the person needs to discuss with their GP. But in principle, I think that you need to take an individual decision. Without knowing more details, it's difficult to say something at this stage. But if someone has any doubts, and that's very much to, with all the conditions, every problem, people should bring this up with their GPs, or who, when they go for their vaccination, people will be asked and they will go over things, and that could come up, and take it from there then.
Thank you, Lei. So our next question here is, I'm 24 and I've been told that although I have epilepsy, I won't get offered the vaccine.
I think that may be a misunderstanding. People that have a diagnosis of epilepsy will be on group 6, and everyone will be eventually offered. But if the person has an history of epilepsy, sometimes what may have happened, they may have changed practice, or there might have been some issue, there might be been some misplacing of files. But if people then contact them saying, yes, I'm 24 and it's a good age to be, but you know, I have epilepsy, and why I'm not being called up for my vaccine as everybody else in group A. That's what I would do.
Thank you, Lei. And we've had, I believe, a few questions around this topic today coming through. It's why have people with epilepsy been prioritised for the COVID-19 vaccine, but not for the flu vaccine?
I think that the idea, I don't know, I haven't made the rules, but the idea is that everyone should have the COVID protection. And whilst the flu at the moment, I personally think everyone should have the flu vaccine. Anyone over, let's say, 40 should have it. But the flu vaccine, we know, is done every year. And whilst the COVID, the idea at the moment is that we should have a one-off. So that might be part of the ration of the thinking behind this. But I'm not the one that has done or made the rules, and I wouldn't know exactly what is the thinking behind this.
Thank you, Lei. So one question we have had come through is somebody asking, is it true that our medication will stop? I believe perhaps medication supply that this person means, if we don't have the vaccine.
I have not heard this. I think that this is really probably some misunderstanding, or someone trying to deliberately there's no ways anyone would have their medication stopped if they refuse to have the vaccine. As I said earlier, the decision, I would always try to encourage someone to have, but if at the end of the day someone takes the decision not to have it, that should not cause any penalties, should not actually be any people having the medication stopped. That is not really something that will ever happen.
Thank you, Lei. And we've had a question come through, which is, if you have non-epileptic seizures, will you also be in priority group 6 for the vaccine?
I don't really know this because there's always other things around it. And I think that everyone needs to be treated on an individual basis and go and discuss this with their provider, their GP, to see where they should be. Non-epileptic attacks or dissociative seizures, they're slightly different. They all should have the vaccine still, but then where in the order is something I wouldn't be able to say now. But of course, there might be other things that go along with this that might help people to fit into one of the priority groups.
Thank you, Lei. I'm just going to take a look through on our side here and see if there are any comments or any more questions people have asked. Okay, this is somebody who said that their parents have had the vaccine received today, but they were told that this person will not qualify under Group 6 because they're too young, so won't be at risk.
Well, you know, I don't really know the details of what means, but if someone has epilepsy, then of course they would be on the priority like everybody. Maybe again there is some misunderstanding. It's difficult without knowing all the details, and I think it's not appropriate for us to discuss, but we should encourage the person to go back to their provider, their health provider, and try to understand what's going on.
Thank you, Lei. And I think this is our kind of last question, perhaps, to wrap up today. And if anybody asks any afterwards, we will, of course, try and get back to you after the Facebook Live is done. But this person has said that due to the vaccine development having been done faster than usual, how can enough research have been done with all the epilepsy medications in regards to contraindications?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. We sort of have always a good idea that drugs that will interact. For instance, someone takes a drug that produces a metabolite, drug is broken down to something, that may have a potential for interaction. If a drug is sort of interfere with proteins or gets bound to proteins, there might be interactions. If drugs are broken down in some systems in the liver, they may have interactions. Theoretically, there shouldn't be any interactions with any of the drugs used in epilepsy, because the way that the vaccine is, it's a very tiny amount of something that is there to cause a reaction of the immune system. And I would not think that that would need any specific studies. There are times you consider antibiotics, drugs, that you need to really do the proper studies. But we have a vast experience with vaccines for many different things, and there's no interactions from drugs that are taken systemically with these vaccines. So I can reassure the person that this is not an issue that I would be worried about.
Thank you, Lei. And thank you to everybody who's joined today. We hope you found it helpful to have this Q&A session done. And yes, we will post the link to the Epilepsy Society's current information as well on COVID-19 and the vaccine, and have a look through and try to get back to any additional questions that might come through. So thank you very much, Lei, for your time, and I think we'll wrap up there.
Yeah.